Okay, that was, as you just saw, the Minister of State Meenakshi Lekhi ji. Now, you might remember just a few days ago, the government announced a special session. And this special session of Parliament, there have been many guesses about what it could possibly be about. One of those three guesses has been about a possible women's reservation bill. Now, why I'm bringing that up is because one of the themes that the Prime Minister spoke about in the interview yesterday was the need for more female empowerment across the country. He said that women are driving the country's economic growth. He said that women are taking the lead in every sector when you take a look at it. He also said women-led development is making waves globally, so not just in India, but across the world. He also said Nari Shakti, or female empowerment, is going to make India one of the top economies. Now, my colleague Arunima is with us. Let's go over to her first to understand this point, and then we'll speak to her and other reporters about other points that the Prime Minister discussed in that interview. Arunima, good morning. We're telling our audiences specifically about the themes of female empowerment that the Prime Minister brought up in that interview. He said a few things. He said women are driving economic growth, women are taking lead in every sector, for example. Arunima, can you just point us to first some of the numbers that back this, and then can you tell us more about the theme of Nari Shakti we've seen play out over the last few months when it comes to the government's focus?
Yes, the government has, not just in political empowerment, but even its policies. I think there is a realization that women are coming of their own. They could be a vote bank of their own as far as elections are concerned. So electoral politics also, if you go back to UP a few years ago, from Ladki Hoon, Lad Sakti Hoon of the Congress party to Nari Shakti slogan of the government now, they're specifically targeting. And even in Madhya Pradesh, you see in the run-up to polls, what are the kinds of policies from the Shivraj Singh Chauhan government? The Ladli Behan Yojana, the Rakhi on the eve of Rakhi, the LPG cylinder waive off that was given was also the market was sold that product by saying that this is a gift for the sisters on the eve of Rakhi. So there is specific move, not just in terms of administration, but also in terms of electoral politics to let the women voters know that their specific needs are being taken care of the government. Now, talking about the women's reservation bill, it's a tricky issue. Yes, parties like TMC, even this morning, TMC has said that why don't you bring in the women's reservation bill? BRS has been really upping the ante, asking for the women's reservation bill. The problem is the parties from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, parties like the Samajwadi Party, the RJD, they want a caste dynamic to the issue of women's reservation as well. And that is what has led to the women's reservation bill not getting passed so far. So the Prime Minister wants to make good of the numbers that the party has in Lok Sabha and wants to ensure that in Rajya Sabha also it's a smooth sell. Then this is perhaps the best opportunity because most of the parties, barring a few, are now veering towards the idea that issues specific to women must be addressed.
Okay, Arunima, you sort of did touch on my next question and this answer too, but I just want to ask you, could you also comment on what the Prime Minister had to say about political stability? Because that's also one of the big themes in the interview that he conducted, simply where he's emphasized that it's the political stability, according to him, over the last few years that has ensured his government and allowed his government to make the kind of impact they have. Can you bring us more context there?
What is the key point that the Bharatiya Janata Party puts across every time it compares itself to the opposition? It says we have Prime Minister Modi, a strong leadership, a decisive leadership compared to UPA era, and they criticized Dr. Manmohan Singh for this, saying that even though he was the Prime Minister, the real power laid with Sonia Gandhi and her National Advisory Council. So if you have to compare UPA with the NDA, the Prime Minister Modi-led NDA era, that's a clear distinction that is made. And then they compare themselves with India alliance that is coming up, and they say that this is a Khichdi alliance. Each party is fighting with the other party in their respective states, TNC versus Congress, CPM versus Congress in Kerala, in other parts also Aam Aadmi Party versus Congress in Punjab. So these are parties which are fighting amongst themselves. So how will they come together on broader national issue? And that is the difference in terms of stability that Prime Minister Modi's government and the opposition's government would bring, and he's underlining it, that if you have a stable, decisive leader, it is easier to take tough calls, tough decisions, because you don't have to appease anybody else, you don't have to, speak to any other constituent of your government, and that is what he underlined even in that interview.
All right, Arunima, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Let's go to my colleague Pallavi Ghosh, who's also with us right now, to bring us more context on these comments. Pallavi, if I could now ask you to take a more general approach for us. Our colleague Arunima gave us context on the comments the Prime Minister just made on women's development, for example. But if I could ask you to give us what the broad takeaways from this interview were, what were truly noteworthy?
Well, that pitch, of course, is in the context of the G20 summit, and context of the G20 summit, there's a very strong messaging which the Prime Minister wants to send out, not just to the people in his country, but also the people abroad. That India is an example of economic growth, and sustainable growth, and also at the same time political stability. Now, this comment becomes very interesting because we are already talking about the India-France taking on the government. Yesterday, we saw Tutu Meme over India versus Bharat, with the India-France leaders claiming that it's a BJP which is unnerved, which is why they are changing the name to Bharat, and so on and so forth. I think the Prime Minister made that very strong political point when he said that he alone has been able to provide governance, and when he first took part, it's very different from what it is now. To the world, the messaging is that India is very much a stable country. When we are surrounded by unstable neighbors, we are seeing what's happening in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. India has been very resilient. So we stood up. But more than that, the message also to developed countries that you cannot see India anymore as a pushover. Whether it's been the Moody's or the Pew survey, whether it has been the various ratings, the GDP figures, it's seen an upswing. In fact, the Prime Minister in his interviews asked this question specifically about inflation, which is a cause for concern. And there he says, yes, but we've also seen a 2% reduction in inflation. Steps are being taken by the government, for example, the recent slash in LPG cylinder prices, and many other steps have also been taken. What is happening now is it's not being ruled only by Delhi. Delhi is not Hindustan. I have a problem with that. So what he's also saying is that the benefits of the governance has gone down to all. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Prayas. That's one. And second is the fact that it's the smaller towns and villages who are aspirational in nature. Their aspiration is something India has been able to provide for.
Okay. Pallavi, thank you for giving us that context. Let's take a deeper dive now into the story around economic growth. My colleague Aman Sharma with more details, more insight about what it is that the Prime Minister said. Take a look.
Yeah, I think India is making a very, very strong pitch for the inclusion of the African Union also in the G20. When the European Union can be a part of it, why not the African Union? And that will also be a strong pitch by Mr. Narendra Modi to pitch for the global south, as India always says that it is the shoulder for the global south, the voice of the global south. And that is also reflecting in this interview, exclusive interview by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Moneycontrol, which is now in fact out on the Moneycontrol website in full details, where Prime Minister is saying India's growth is good for the world. He's spoken on various topics, India and the global south, India's G20 presidency, how it became a democratization of the G20 event, where it was taken to over 60 cities with 220 events by India out of Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore to even tier 2 cities. The PM also speaking about India's growth story, how India is going to become the third largest economy in the world in the years to come, the roadmap for the same. PM also speaking about the issue of reining in inflation and how his government has taken steps to rein in inflation, including mentioning the recent cut of rupees 200 in the LPG prices. The Prime Minister also speaking about how it is the big mandate that he got from the people in 2014 as well as 2019, which has led to stability in government, a stable, strong government, which has led to also to deep structural reforms, which has led to this growth. So very, very important points being made by the PM. If we break it down into 5 major things, what the PM has said, obviously he speaks about India and the G20. He speaks about the global south. He speaks about India's rapidly expanding and in fact the digital public infrastructure. We have seen the heights that the India's UPI platform has reached. PM is speaking about how to rein in inflation, the steps his government has taken, and of course the road to the third largest economy. If we come to the point of reining in inflation for that matter, which has been on the top of minds of many world leaders, the PM says that inflation is a key issue that the world faces, and first the pandemic and then the conflict between Russia and Ukraine have changed the global inflation dynamics, but his government has taken a number of steps to control inflation. He says even in the face of global adversities, global dynamics which have been seen in the last 2 years, India's inflation was 2 percentage points lower than what the global average inflation rate was in 2022. He also says that we are not resting on this, we are continuing to make pro-people decisions to boost the ease of living. And he says recently on Raksha Bandhan, you saw how India brought down the price of LPG by rupees 200 for all consumers.